Good morning. I'm so tired and this is very late, but that's okay. This is Past the Donut. I don't have an intro yet because I'm not sure how I want to do an intro for this. So eventually we'll get there. Um, this is like my first official episode. I'm trying to be as consistent as possible. And when I say consistent as possible, I mean every week. I'm not sure if I'll actually post on Mondays exactly or Thursdays. It really all depends on what's going on. I do work full time, so yeah. Yeah. So I guess I can just start. If you hear any weird sounds, that's my dog. Um, he's wide awake now, so he'll be making various sounds. So yeah. So this episode is like my official first episode, and I decided to start with a sculptor because I never really got into it myself, but I find it kind of cool. It's interesting how it's done. Pretty sure it takes forever to do. I've tried not sculpting, but like making stuff like pottery. I've tried that, and it was never came out the way I expected or wanted, which is fine. I'll try again eventually. But yeah. So, black artists of the 19th century, Edmonia Lewis, and she was a sculptor. Reading about her, trying to find information about her, she was a bit private, so there really wasn't a lot of information that I could find on her. Everything that I found was pretty much the same as far as information goes. Very, I guess, very basic of her life in like chronological order. I guess as best as people could find, because again, she was like a very private person. She was born Mary Edmonia Lewis on July 4th, 1844 in Greenbush, New York, and died September 17th, 1907 in London. And she was a neoclassical artist, and her themes explored religion and classical themes in religion. And she was the daughter of an African American man and a woman of African, and I'm going to butcher this, Ojibwa is a Chippewa descent. She was orphaned at a young age. I'm reading off of that. If it sounds like I'm being robotic, I'm not trying to. She was orphaned at a young age and reportedly lived with her maternal aunts among the Ojibwa, who called her Wildfire. With the help of her older brother, she obtained admission to the preparatory department of Oberlin College in 1859, and from 1860 to 1863, she attended the college proper. She thrived at Oberlin, excelling particularly at drawing, but she left in 1863, and after having been accused of poisoning two of her classmates in 1862 and of theft in 1863. And because of this, she was beaten severely before her trial for accusations of poisoning. So yeah, no shocker there that she was accused of anything. Because again, she is a black woman in the 19th century doing things that many of us were not. Well, maybe not many of us, but in a college that probably didn't want her there. Most likely, yeah, did not want her there. And she was excelling. And a lot of times, almost all the time, they never liked that. So She was later acquitted by John Mercer Langston and with her brother's support. And she made her way to Boston, where abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison introduced her to a local sculptor from whom she received a few lessons in modeling. So at some point she does go to Rome, and I read that she was kind of really just sick and tired of what was going on, and I don't blame her. One of her first works was publicly seen as was a medallion advertised for sale early in 1864 that featured the head of a militant abolitionist John Brown. Later in the year, her bust of Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, a Boston hero who had been killed leading his black troops in the attack of Fort Wagner, part of the assault on Charleston, South Carolina. And sales of her copies of the bust allowed her to sail in 1865 to Rome, where Charlotte Cushman, Harriet Hosmer, and other members of the American art community took her under their wing. And that's when she started working on marble. And she refused to hire Italian stone carvers to transfer her plaster models to marble in order to quell any question that the work was her own. And fully understands, because it's just to have that self-awareness that, like, you know, if you had hired someone who wasn't like you, did not look like you, would take your work and then just pass it off as their own. And we all know as artists how people love to steal our art. And Lewis quickly achieved success as a sculptor. Inspired by the Emancipation Proclamation, she carved the freed woman and her child in 1866 and Forever Free in 1867. She subsequently turned to Native American themes, I like to say indigenous American themes, and created the marriage of, again, I'm going to butcher this, Hiawatha, 1868, and the Old Arrow Maker and His Daughter. More than one version, both based on the narrative poem The Song of Hiawatha in 1855 by Harry Wadsworth Longfellow, of whom she carved more than one bust. Her other notable works include busts of Garrison in 1866, Abraham Lincoln, and Hygeia in 1871, both in 1871. A gravesite statue that was commissioned by Harry K. Hunt. Lewis also depicted biblical figures such as Hagar, more than one version. Her career reached its peak in 1876 when her sculpture, The Death of Cleopatra, was exhibited at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. In 1883, she received her last major commission, a version of the Adoration of Magi. Oh, sorry. I have like this to sneeze. From a church in Baltimore, Maryland. It was variously reported that Lewis had last been seen in Rome in 1909 or 1911, but death records discovered in the earliest 21st century that she died in London in 1907. So, yeah, like I said, it was really hard to find, like, a lot of information on her because I guess back then it'd be, if you were just very, very private. And again, you know, it's like the 19th century. Not a lot of people really kept records of themselves. I tried to do my due diligence and find as much as I could, but it's hard for us a lot of times, especially back then. We were just getting together, just barely free, and trying to make ways for ourselves and, met with a lot of opposition, and a lot of our history gets lost. It's never really shared, and for the ones who are who are written about, we never really find out about them till we're older. Thank God for Google, to where we can look people up and then find books of them that we want to read. But again, a lot of artists like her are not taught in schools. You don't learn about them. You learn about Michelangelo or Da Vinci, Picasso, like the main ones, the dudes that were the Ninja Turtles were named after. And while no discredit to them, but like with many things in the world, we contributed a lot. And sculpting is it seems insanely hard and insanely time consuming. And to navigate a world that doesn't want you in that space, doesn't want you at all, made you leave where you were staying because they made it very clear that they want you. Unsure of, again, death was a pretty big threat early on, and you were unsure of what could happen to you. And go to a new country, again, unsure of what could happen, and still make a way for yourself. I couldn't find if she had married or had any kids. And it says that, she spent most of her adult career in Rome, where Italy's less pronounced racism allowed increased opportunity to a Black artist. And unsure if there was less racism. Pretty sure it, because slavery wasn't. Was there slavery in Italy during that time? I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure. So from Wikipedia, let's see. So I guess this is a quote. I was particularly driven to Rome in order to obtain the opportunities of art, culture, and to find social atmosphere where I was not constantly reminded of my color. The land of liberty had no room for a colored sculptor. And it absolutely did not. Fully understand a lot of us didn't have the opportunities to leave, and I'm glad she left, because she could thrive without stress of being a Black woman who's a sculptor. So the success and popularity of her works in Boston allowed her to bear the cost of the trip. On her 1865 passport is written, M. Edmonia Lewis is a Black girl sent by subscription to Italy, having displayed great talents as a sculptor. The established sculptor Hiram Powers gave her space to work in his studio. She entered a circle of expatriate, I can't say that word, artists, and established her own space within the former studio of 18th century Italian sculptor Antonio Canova, just off the Piazza Barberini. She received professional support from both Charlotte Cushman, a Boston actress and a pivotal figure in expatriate sculptors in Rome, and Maria Weston Chapman, a dedicated worker on the anti-slavery cause. And there, Lewis enjoyed more social, spiritual, and artistic freedom than she had in the United States. She was Catholic, and Rome allowed her to both spiritual and physical closeness in her faith. In America, Lewis would have had to continue relying on abolitionist patronage, but Italy allowed her to make her own in the international art world. She began sculpting in marble and working with the neoclassical manner. Neoclassical art, to those who aren't sure, the definition, was a Western cultural movement in the decorative and visual arts, literature, theater, music, and architecture that drew inspiration from the art of and culture of classical antiquity. Neoclassicalism was born in Rome, largely thanks to the writings of Johann Joachim Wickelmann. At the time of the rediscovery of Pompeii and Herculaneum, but its popularity spread all over Europe as generation of European art students finished their grand tour and returned from Italy to go to their home countries with newly discovered Greco-Roman ideals. The main neoclassical movement coincided with 18th century age of enlightenment and continued into early 19th century, latterly competing with Romanticism. In architecture, the style continued throughout 19th, 20th, and up to 21st century. So to give like a description of, and I'll post pictures in the post about like, so you can get an idea. Let me see. It's hard because I want to add more about her, but there's not a lot. So finishing off, she focused on naturalism within themes and images relating to Black and American Indian people. The surroundings of the classical world greatly inspired her and influenced her work, in which she recreated the classical art style, such as presenting people in her sculptures as draped in robes rather than contemporary clothing. Ooh, I like that. She wears a red cap in her, and this is a description of her. She wears a red cap in her studio, which is very picturesque and effective. Her face is a bright, intelligent, and expressive one. Her manners are childlike, simple, and most winning and pleasing. There is something in human nature which makes everyone admire a brave and heroic spirit. And if people are not always ready to lend a helping hand to struggling genius, they are all eager to applaud when those struggles are drowned with success. The hour of applause has come to Edmonia Lewis. Lewis was unique in the way that she approached sculpting abroad. She insisted on enlarging her clay and wax models in marble herself rather than hire Italian sculptors to do it for her. The common practice at the time. Male sculptors were largely skeptical, no shocker, of the talent of female sculptors and often accused them of not doing their own work. Ooh, no shocker there. Harriet Hosmer, a fellow sculptor and expatriate, also did this. Lewis also was known to make sculptures before receiving commissions for them. She sent unsolicited works to Boston patrons requesting that they raise funds for materials and shipping. While in Rome, Lewis continued to express her African American Native American heritage. One of her more famous works, Forever Free, depicted a powerful image of an African American man and woman emerging from the bonds of slavery. Another sculpture Lewis created was called The Arrow Maker, which showed a Native American father teaching his daughter how to make an arrow. Whoopsie. Her work sold for large sums of money. In 1873, an article in the New Orleans Picayune stated Edmonia Lewis had snared two $50,000 commissions. Well, I wonder what that is today. So let's look it up. $50,000 in 1873 today. I don't think that's right, but wow. So in 1873, 50,000 is the equivalent in purchasing power to about 1,241,716 today. Whoa. She was making money. I really like that. I would like to have $50,000. Get those commissions. Her newfound popularity made her studio a tourist destination. Lewis had many major exhibitions during her rise to fame, including one in Chicago in 1870 and in Rome. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to yawn nor sneeze. In 1872, Edmonia was summoned to Peterborough, New York, to sculpt wealthy abolitionist Gerrit Smith, a project conceived by his friends. Smith was not pleased, and what Lewis completed was a sculpture of collapsed hands of Gerrit and his beloved wife Anne. Oh, that's rough. And a major coup in her career was participating in the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. For this, she created a monumental 15-pound marble sculpture, The Death of Cleopatra, portraying the queen in the throes of death. This piece depicts the moment popularized by Shakespeare in Antony and Cleopatra, in which Cleopatra had allowed herself to be bitten by a poisonous asp following the loss of her crown. Of the piece, J.S. Ingraham wrote that Cleopatra was the most remarkable piece of sculpture in the American section of the exposition. Much of the viewing public was shocked by Lewis's frank portrayal of death, but the statue drew thousands of viewers nonetheless. Cleopatra was considered a woman of both sensuous beauty and demonic power, and her self-annihilation has been portrayed numerously in art, literature, and cinema. In Death of Cleopatra, Edmonia Lewis added an innovative flair by portraying the Egyptian queen in a disheveled and elegant manner, and a departure from the refined, composed Victorian approach of representing death. Considering Lewis's interest in emancipation imagery, as seen in her work Forever Free, it is not surprising that Lewis eliminated Cleopatra's usual companion figures of loyal slaves from her work, as she should. Lewis's The Death of Cleopatra may have been a response to the culture of the Centennial Exposition, which celebrated 100 years of the United States being built around the principles of liberty and freedom, a celebration of unity despite centuries of slavery. The recent Civil War and the failing attempts and efforts of Reconstruction in order to avoid any acknowledgement of Black empowerment by the Centennial, Lewis's sculpture could not have directly addressed the subject of emancipation. Although her white contemporaries were also sculpting Cleopatra and other comparable subject matter, such as Harriet Hosmer's Zenobia, Lewis was more prone to scrutiny on the premise of race and gender due to the fact that she, like Cleopatra, was female. The associations between Cleopatra and a Black Africa were so profound that any depiction of the ancient Egyptian queen had to contend with the issue of her race and the potential expectation of her blackness. Lewis' white queen gained the aura of historical accuracy through primary research without sacrificing its symbolic links to abolitionism, Black America, or Black diaspora. But what it refused to facilitate was the racial objectification of the artist's body. Lewis could not so readily become the subject of her own representation if her subject was corporeally white. I want to sculpt something. No, I'm lying, I don't. But I think I'm going to try and do my best to find more about her. There's the biography that I'm going to read, and I'm going to have some updates later on. I think it's, not interesting because it's not shocking that, they would be very critical of her work, and they would not understand, they would not gather the similarities between her Cleopatra and race during that time, because people forget that in ancient Egypt, Africans were also Egyptian and slaves. And to remove them from the statue itself should have been the ding-dang. But They were more probably concerned with the fact that she was a Black sculptor in a white space. I'll put a picture of the sculpture itself. And the way they describe it, it's not as dramatic as they worded it to be. And she's literally just sitting and her head's to the side, and then her clothes are askew. But probably for the time, it was very... I cannot wait to do more artists. I have a few more sculptures that I want to look at and deep dive, and I'll probably add more about her in those, kind of just adding a little bit more if I could find out more. I want to know about the works that weren't seen. I want to know about her, and if she had ever been active as an abolitionist. I know outwardly she was with her work, but I want to know more. I need to know more about the people who, shaped America and not just, built it. I want to know about my people who created things, were the artists, the musicians, the writers. We're not really aware that we did a lot, and not just back then by building and growing. We had whole towns that thrived. We have a whole era of the Harlem Renaissance, and I want to know all that. I want to know everything before that, and I want to know how much to culture did we contribute. I know we contribute a lot, but it's like, it feels like we've done everything. We built the country, we fed the country, we created a culture of art and literature and music, very heavy on the music that people still to this day don't acknowledge. That we created a sound that everyone else copies and puts their name on with no recognition at all. And the recognition we do get is very minor. This is where they got it from, and that's it. We can go on and on about what is Black culture. Black culture is American culture because we built it here. From, again, the food you eat, from the music you listen to. But not just that. We were sculptors. We were painters. We were writers. We were academics. We invented things that people use today. And I think it's important to remind people that what you see now is not Black culture just starting. It didn't just start in the 90s. It didn't just start in the 80s. It's gone back since we've been brought here. And many other cultures as well have contributed so much and get little to no recognition and acknowledgement. And I want to start sharing these stories with you, hopefully getting more information. I'm so sorry that it may seem awkward. I am still nervous and trying to find... I'm not good at research, I realize. I'm 32 and I'm not good at it. I should probably get better. I see why people buy books for this sometimes. So I'm going to start getting books, and that's going to be a lot. I don't know how you read a book in a week and you work full time. That is going to be hard. But hopefully this episode was not too awkward for you to listen to, and you enjoyed it nonetheless. If anything, it makes you go look and see who she was. And you look into her. All I wanted to do was give the name, what she did, and you do the rest. Until next time.